Hi, I'm Suzi Dafnis of the Australian Businesswomen's Network. I'm back today with Catherine Fox, Deputy Editor of the Financial Review's Boss magazine. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We're talking about some of the myths that tend to justify why there aren't more women in leadership positions. So the myth I want to start off by busting or looking at with you is that if women just behave more like men and were less emotional, then they would get ahead.
I hear this all the time. It's actually part of something that's now known as the deficit model, which basically says, women, you're never quite right. You know, if you could only do this or do that, lower your voice, negotiate a pay rise a little bit better, network. Have you ever met a woman who couldn't network, by the way? But it goes on, and there's a long list. And the upshot of it is that basically women are in need of remedial assistance. Now, this is because, of course, we still have such a male-dominated business scene, especially in the top ranks. So all the role models, in fact, and all the standards and norms around what makes up a successful business person are about men. So a woman will always be different. And I guess my problem with this myth is that I think it sends women down a blind alley. They go out and buy lots of books or go to seminars and get told to wear their hair in a certain way, to dress in a certain way, to walk, to speak in a certain way. I'm sorry, if any of that actually worked, we'd have been doing it a long time ago. The worst advice I think you can give anyone in life is to be something other than they are. It's not the way to get ahead. The way to change this, of course, is it's a much bigger question and bigger challenge, but it is about changing the norms around what makes up a successful person in the business world. And only by more women being there can we change that.
There's a myth that women are scarce in the workplace and therefore there aren't enough of them coming up the ranks to fill those senior spots.
Yeah, so this is the pipeline idea that if there were only more women around, we could appoint them to the senior management jobs. Look, I have to say about 20, maybe 30 years ago, there was some validity in that, but really, again, that's flying in the face of all the data we have. Women make up just under half of the workforce in Australia. Women of working age, about 60% of them are in paid work. We're the majority. And that's steadily increased for the last 2 decades. There are no signs that that will change. They're also graduating from university at a much higher level than men. Something like 55% of graduates are now women. And that's also increasing steadily. It really just doesn't add up. If women are being educated and entering the workplace, then how on earth could the pipeline not deliver? I tell you what is happening to block it, however, is they're not being promoted. And really, in a nutshell, slightly simplistically, the reason there aren't more women up in senior ranks is that men are not promoting them. That's the issue. It's not the supply.
One of the things that organisations I consider forward thinking are doing is that they're developing programs for their senior women. They're mentoring programs, they're opportunities for them to improve their skills, and yet we hear men in those organisations sometimes say that, well, that's unfair.
That's a very common complaint, in fact, and I can't tell you how many times at a networking event where I've been speaking, a woman will put her hand up, and often in quite senior roles, and say, I got up to come to this function today and my colleague said to me, how come you get to go to that? That's unfair. I guess I take people back to affirmative action principles here. Affirmative action, which was most effectively, I suppose, used in the 60s in America around race, was developed to help those who were not getting a fair deal and who had fallen behind. The same principles apply now in the workplace around women. They're not getting a fair deal. It is not an even playing field. Therefore, special measures are needed to assist them to have something approaching the same opportunities as their male colleagues. That's simply why we put some resources and attention around women. And the same, as I say, applied in the US, and that's why we ended up with Barack Obama as president of the US. So sometimes you need to deliberately target a group that is underrepresented and has less power.
Does doing that, though, keep that idea that women will always be different because they have to have a special program just for them?
Look, I suppose there is a risk there, but in fact they've always been treated as different. So there is a reality there, isn't there? I would always say that I think anything that helps bring women together is a very useful thing to do. I think men have that almost by default in many workplaces, and I think for women it's been much more difficult. They're much scarcer at those top levels. So I think sharing knowledge, networking, doing all those things that men do in a fairly informal way in the workforce is not really making them different, but it is giving them the same sort of ingredients that men have had, which have helped them to pursue their careers. And yes, if it reinforces a bit of difference, well, frankly, you know, big deal. It's about the ends, not the means.
Let's have a look at another myth, and this is probably the final one in this series, and that is that time will heal all. What is that myth about?
I guess what surprises me is I still hear it. When I started out working 30 years ago, I heard it a lot, and I was part of a cohort in this country that was the first group of women really en masse that had come through university, and we were told not to worry too much about things. It would all now just naturally unfold, and I have to say I believed that. It just hasn't happened, and the last set of figures that we had here, the census of women in leadership, which was nearly 2 years ago, in fact showed we'd gone backwards. So I think what we need to remind people is there is no guarantee that progress, and it's been very shifting, the progress that we've had, although we have had it, continues to go forward. There is no guarantee of that. And I think it's important to remind all of us, men and women alike, that if we want change, and this is fairly large scale change and sophisticated change, we have to keep promoting it and understanding what's at stake here. I don't like to sound like a Cassandra, but frankly, if we continue in the way that we've been going, I think it's plausible that at some stage people will say, well, if women are never going to get to the senior ranks and utilise that expensive education that they've had, maybe we should think twice about letting women take up those positions at university and being trained in those degrees. I honestly think that's the worst case scenario, but we do have to be logical about this. So we have to, I think, all of us women, especially those of us who are in the workplace, to continue to remind our colleagues and peers that there is a lot at stake here, and there's a lot of wastage if we don't let women pursue their potential.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.